like that more, if I'm honest.
Yeah. He doesn't come for story time. Who needs him?
Yeah, exactly.
I figured that was the right time to start recording.
Okay, and we're rolling. Here, don't worry,
Right.
Frankie. I'll take it from here. Mon père, this morning I saw a discarded Twix wrapper at the bus stop, and I came out of sheer righteous anger. Next chapter.
Sorry, children are watching.
Sorry, okay.
Rory, there are going to be
Moving on.
there are going to be children watching this.
Sorry.
We started recording before you started.
No, it just occurred to me. I apologize.
I reserve the right to maybe cut that when I upload
Yeah,
it,
fair,
but
fair.
maybe I won't. Maybe I won't. You won't know till tomorrow afternoon. Right. Stop being so silly and charming.
Serious faces
And
on.
serious faces on. This is chocolate and literature. Serious business. Okay. No. Okay, Zach, can you mute all of these people? Because if I can hear you
That's
laughing,
not a serious
I will
face,
laugh.
Frankie.
Okay. How about this
Is Zach producing?
one? Zach is directing. He's my director and agent and my strong right hand. Right. Are we all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Chapter 13. Sunday, February 23rd. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I know you can hear me, mon père, and there is no one else to whom I would care to confess. Certainly not the bishop, secure in his distant diocese of Bordeaux, and the church seems so empty. I feel foolish at the foot of the altar, looking up at our Lord in his guilt and agony. The gilding is tarnished with the smoke from the candles, and the dark staining gives him a sly and secretive look. And prayer, which came as such a blessing, such a source of joy in the early days, is a burden, a cry on the side of a bleak mountain which might at any time unleash the avalanche upon me. Is this doubt, mon père? This silence within myself, this inability to pray, to be cleansed, humbled, is it my fault? I look about the church, which is my life, and I try to feel love for it. Love as you loved for the statues, Saint Jerome with the chipped nose, the smiling Virgin, Jeanne d'Arc with her banner, St. Francis with his painted pigeons. I myself dislike birds. I feel this may be a sin against my namesake, but I cannot help it. Their squawking, their filth. Even at the doors of the church, the whitewashed walls streaked with the greenish daub of their leavings, their noise during sermons. I poison the rats which infest the sacristy and gnaw at the vestments there. Should I not also poison the pigeons which disrupt my service? I have tried, mon père, but to no avail. Perhaps St. Francis protects them. If only I could be more worthy. My unworthiness dismays me, my intelligence, which is far in excess of that of my flock, serving only to heighten the weakness, the cheapness of the vessel God has chosen to serve. Is this my destiny? I dreamed of greater things, of sacrifices, of martyrdoms. Instead, I fritter away time in anxieties which are unworthy of me, unworthy of you. My sin is that of pettiness, mon père. For this reason, God is silent in his house. I know it, but I do not know how to cure the ill. I have increased the austerity of my Lenten fast, choosing to continue even on the days when a relaxation is permitted. Today, for instance, I poured my Sunday libation onto the hydrangeas and felt a definite lifting of the spirit. For now, water and coffee will be the only accompaniment to my meals, the coffee to be taken black and sugarless to enhance the bitter taste. Today I had a carrot salad with olives, roots and berries in the wilderness. True, I feel a little lightheaded now, but the sensation is not unpleasant. I feel a prick of guilt at the thought that even my deprivation gives me pleasure, and I resolve to place myself in the path of temptation. I shall stand for 5 minutes at the window of the rotisserie, watching the chickens on spit. If Arnaud taunts me, so much the better. In any case, he should be closed for Lent. As for Vien Rocher, I have hardly thought of her these past few days. I walk past her shop with my face averted. She has prospered in spite of the season and the disapproval of the right-thinking elements of Lansquenet, but this I attribute to the novelty of such a shop. That will wear off. Our parishioners have little enough money already for their everyday needs without subsidizing a place more suited to the big cities. La Céleste Praline. Even the name is a calculated insult. I shall take the bus to Agen, to the housing rental agency, and complain. She should never have been allowed to take the lease in the first place. The central location of the shop ensures a kind of prosperity, encourages temptation. The bishop should be informed. Perhaps he may be able to exercise the influence I do not possess. I shall write to him today. I see her sometimes in the street. She wears a yellow raincoat with green daisies, a child's garment but for its length, slightly indecent on a grown woman. Her hair remains uncovered even in the rain, gleaming sleekly as a seal's pelt. She wrings it out like a long rope as she reaches the awning. There are often people waiting under that awning, sheltering from the interminable rain and watching the window display. She has installed an electric fire now, close enough to the counter to provide comfort, though not close enough to damage her wares. And with the stools, the glass cloche filled with cakes and pies, the silver jugs of chocolate on the hob, the place looks more like a cafe than a shop. I often see 10 or more people in there on some days, some standing, some leaning against the padded counter and talking. On Sunday and Wednesday afternoons, the smell of baking fills the damp air, and she leans in the doorway, floury to the elbows, throwing out pert remarks at the passers-by. I am amazed at how many people she now knows by name. It was 6 months before I knew all of my flock, and she always seems ready with a question or a comment about their lives, their problems. Poitou's arthritis, Lambert's soldier son, Narcisse and his prize orchids. She even knows the name of Duplessis' dog. Oh, she is wily. Impossible to fail to notice her. One must respond or seem churlish. Even I must smile and nod, though inside I am seething. Her daughter follows her lead, running wild in Les Maraudes with a gang of older girls and boys. 8 or 9 years old, most of them, and they treat her with affection, like a little sister, like a mascot. They are always together, running, shouting, making their arms into bomber planes and shooting each other, chanting, catcalling. Jean Dru is among them, in spite of his mother's concern. Once or twice she has tried to forbid him, but he grows more rebellious every day, climbing out of his bedroom window when she shuts him in. But I have more serious concerns, mon père, than the misbehavior of a few unruly brats. Passing by Les Maraudes before Mass today, moored at the side of the town, I saw a houseboat of the type you and I both know well. A wretched thing, green painted but peeling miserably. A tin chimney spouting black and noxious fumes. A corrugated roof like the roofs of the cardboard shacks in Marseille's bidonville. You and I know what this means, what it will bring about. The first of the spring's dandelions poking their heads from out of the sodden turf of the roadside. Every year they try it, coming upriver from the cities and the shanty towns, or worse, further afield from Algeria and Morocco, looking for work, looking for a place to settle, to breed. I preached a sermon against them this morning, but I know that in spite of this, some of my parishioners, Narcisse among them, will make them welcome in defiance of me. They are vagrants. They have no respect and no values. They are the river gypsies, spreaders of disease, thieves, liars, murderers when they can get away with it. Let them stay and they will spoil everything we have worked for, Père. All our education. Their children will run with ours until everything we have done for them is ruined. They will steal our children's minds away. Teach them hatred and disrespect for the church. Teach them laziness and avoidance of responsibility. Teach them crime and the pleasures of drugs. Have they already forgotten what happened that summer? Are they fool enough to believe the same thing will not happen again? I went to the houseboat this afternoon. 2 more had already joined it, one red and one black. The rain had stopped and there was a line of washing strung between the 2 new arrivals, upon which children's clothes hung limply. On the deck of the black boat, a man sat with his back to me, fishing. Long red hair tied with a scrap of cloth, bare arms tattooed to the shoulder in henna. I stood watching the boats, marveling at their wretchedness, their defiant poverty. What good are these people doing themselves? We are a prosperous country, a European power. There should be jobs for these people, useful jobs, good housing. Why do they then choose to live like this in idleness and misery? Are they so lazy? The red-haired man on the deck of the black boat forked a protective sign at me and returned to his fishing. You can't stay here, I called across the water. This is private property. You must move on. Laughter and jeering from the boats. I felt an angry throbbing at my temples, but remained calm. You can talk to me, I called again. I am a priest. We can perhaps find a solution. Several faces had appeared at the windows and doorways of the 3 boats. I saw 4 children, a young woman with a baby and 3 or 4 older people, swathed in the grey no-colour which characterizes these people, their faces sharp and suspicious. I saw that they turned to red hair for their cue. I addressed him. Hey, you! His posture was all attentiveness and ironic deference. Why don't you come over here and talk? I can explain better if I'm not shouting at you across half the river, I told him. Explain away, he said. He spoke with such a thick Marseille accent I could hardly make out his words. I can hear you fine. His people on the other boats nudged each other and sniggered. I waited patiently for silence. This is private property, I repeated. You can't stay here, I'm afraid. There are people living along here. I indicated the riverside houses along the Avenue des Marais. True, many of them are now deserted, having fallen in disrepair from damp and neglect, but some are still inhabited. Red hair gave me a scornful look. There are also people living here, he said, indicating the boats. I understand that, but nevertheless, he cut me short. Don't worry, we're not staying long. His tone was final. We need to make repairs, collect supplies. We can't do that in the middle of the countryside. Will be 2 weeks, maybe 3. Think you can live with that, huh? Perhaps a bigger village. I felt myself bristling at his insolent air, but remained calm. A town like Argen, maybe. Shortly. That's no good. We came from there. I'm sure he did. They take a hard line with vagrants in Argen. If only we had our own police in Lansquenet. I've got a problem with my engine. I've been trailing oil for miles downriver. I've got to fix it before I can move on. I squared my shoulders. I don't think you'll find what you're looking for here, I said. Well, everyone has an opinion. He sounded dismissive, almost amused. One of the old women cackled. Even a priest is entitled to that. More laughter. I kept my dignity. These people are not worth my anger. I turned to leave. Well, well, it's Monsieur le Curé. The voice came from just behind me, and in spite of myself, I recoiled. Armand Voisin gave a small crow of laughter. Nervous, hey? She asked maliciously. You should be. You're out of your territory here, aren't you? What's the mission this time? Converting the pagans? Madame? In spite of her insolence, I gave her a polite nod. I trust you are in good health. Oh, do you? Her black eyes fizzed with laughter. I was under the impression that you couldn't wait to give me the last rites. Not at all, madame. I was coldly dignified. Good, because this old lamb's never going back into the fold, she declared. Too tough for you, anyway. I remember your mother saying. I bit her off more sharply than I intended. I'm afraid I have no time for chit-chat today, madame. These people, a gesture in the direction of the river gypsies, these people must be dealt with before the situation gets out of hand. I have the interests of my flock to protect. What a windbag you are nowadays, remarked Armand lazily. The interests of your flock. I remember when you were just a little boy playing Indians in Les Maraudes. What do they teach you in the city apart from pompousness and self-importance? I glared at her. Alone in all Lansquenet, she delights in reminding me of things best forgotten. It occurs to me that when she dies, that memory will die with her, and I am almost glad of it. You may relish the thought of vagrants taking over Les Maraudes, I told her sharply, but other people, your daughter among them, understand that if you allow them to get a foot in the door. Armand gave a snort of laughter. She even talks like you, she said, strings of pulpit cliches and nationalist platitudes. Seems to me these people are doing no harm. Why make a crusade of expelling them when they'll be leaving soon anyway? I shrugged. Clearly you don't want to understand the issue, I said shortly. Well, I already told Rue over there. A sly wave to the man on the black houseboat. I told him he and his friends would be welcome for as long as it takes to fix his engine and stock up on food. She gave me a sly, triumphant look. So you can't say they're trespassing. They're here in front of my house with my blessing. She gave the last words special emphasis, as if to taunt me. As are their friends when they arrive. She shot me another of her insolent glances. All their friends. Well, I should have expected it. She would have done it only to spite me. She enjoys the notoriety it affords her, knowing that as the village's oldest resident, a certain license is allowed her. There is no point in arguing with her, mon père. We know that already. She would enjoy the argument as much as she relishes contact with these people, their stories, their lives. Not surprising that she has already learned their names. I will not allow her the satisfaction of seeing me plead. No, I must go about the business in other ways. I have learned one thing from Armand, at least. There will be others. How many, we must wait and see, but it is as I feared. 3 of them today. Tomorrow, how many more? I called on Clermont on the way here. He will spread the word. I expect some resistance. Armand still has friends. Narcisse may need some persuasion. But on the whole, I expect cooperation. I am still someone in this village. My good opinion counts for something. I saw Muscat too. He sees most people in his cafe, head of the residence committee, a right-thinking man, in spite of his faults, a good churchgoer. And if a strong hand were needed, of course, we all deplore violence, but with these people, we cannot rule out the possibility. Well, I am certain that Muscat would oblige. Armand called it a crusade. She meant it as an insult, I know, but even so, I feel a surge of excitement at the thought of this conflict. Could this be the task for which God has chosen me? This is why I came to Lansquenet, mon père, to fight for my people, to save them from temptation. And when Vienne Rocher sees the power of the church, my influence over every single soul in the community, then she will know she has lost. Whatever her hopes, her ambitions, she will understand that she cannot stay, cannot fight and hope to win. I will stand triumphant. End of chapter 13. Right?
Yeah.
What an a-hole.
We love you, Frankie.
I love you too. Another?
Yay.
Yeah.
He's so damn thirsty.
Thirsty.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Chapter 14. Monday, February 24th. Caroline Clermont called just after Mass. Her son was with her, satchel slung across his shoulders, a tall boy with a pale, impassive face. She was carrying a bundle of yellow hand-lettered cards. I smiled at them both. The shop was almost empty. I expect the first of my regulars at about 9, and it was 8:30. Only Anouk was sitting at the counter, a half-finished bowl of milk and a pan of chocolat in front of her. She shot a bright glance at the boy, waved the pastry in a vague gesture of greeting, and returned to her breakfast. Can I help you? Caroline looked around her with an expression of envy and disapproval. The boy stared straight in front of him, but I saw his eyes wanting to slide toward Anouk. He looked polite and sullen, his eyes bright and unreadable beneath an overlong fringe. Yes. Her voice is light and falsely cheery, her smile as sharp and sweet and icing, setting the teeth on edge. I'm distributing these. She held up the stack of cards, and I wonder if you'd mind displaying one in your window. She held it out. Everyone else is putting them up, she added, as if that might sway my decision. I took the card. Black on yellow in neat, bold capitals. No hawkers, vagrants, or peddlers. The management retains the right to refuse to serve at any given time. Why do I need this? I frowned, puzzled. Why should I want to refuse to serve anyone? Caroline sent me a look of pity and contempt. Of course, you are new here, she said with a sugared smile, but we've had problems in the past. It's just a precaution anyway. I very much doubt you'll get a visit from those people. But you may as well be safe as sorry, don't you think? I still didn't understand. Sorry about what? Well, the gypsies, the river people. There was a note of impatience in her voice. They're back, and they'll be wanting to... She made a small, elegant moue of disgust. Do whatever it is they do. And? I prompted gently. Well, we'll have to show them we won't stand for it. Caroline was becoming flustered. We're going to have an agreement not to serve these people. Make them go back to wherever it is they came from. Oh. I considered what she was saying. Can we refuse to serve them? I inquired curiously. If they have the money to spend, can we refuse? Impatiently. Of course we can. Who's to stop us? I thought for a moment, then handed back the yellow card. Caroline stared at me. You're not going to do it? Her voice rose half an octave, losing much of its well-bred intonation in the process. I shrugged. It seems to me that if someone wants to spend their money here, it isn't up to me to stop them, I told her. But the community, insisted Caroline. Surely you don't want people of that type. Itinerants, thieves, Arabs, for heaven's sake. Flutter-click snapshot of memory. Scowling New York doormen, Paris ladies, Sacré-Cœur tourists, camera in hand, face averted to avoid seeing the beggar girl with her too short dress and too long legs. Caroline Clermont, for all her rural upbringing, knows the value of finding the right modiste. The discreet scarf she wears at her throat bears an Hermès label, and her perfume is Coco de Chanel. My reply was sharper than I intended. It strikes me that the community should mind its own business, I said tartly. It isn't up to me or anybody to decide how these people should live their lives. Caroline gave me a venomous look. Oh, well, if that's how you feel, turning superciliously towards the door, then I won't keep you from your business. A slight emphasis upon the last word, a disdainful glance at the empty seats. I just hope you don't regret your decision, that's all. Why should I? She shrugged petulantly. Well, if there's trouble or anything. From her tone, I gathered the conversation was at an end. These people can cause all kinds of trouble, you know. Drugs, violence. The sourness of her smile suggested that if there were any such trouble, she would be pleased to see me the victim of it. The boy stared at me without comprehension. I smiled back. I saw your grandmother the other day, I told him. She told me a lot about you. The boy flushed and mumbled something unintelligible. Caroline stiffened. I'd heard she was here, she said. She forced a smile. You really shouldn't encourage my mother, she added with counterfeit archness. She's quite bad enough already. Oh, I found her most entertaining company, I replied without taking my eyes off the boy. Quite refreshing and very sharp. For her age, said Caroline. For any age, I said. Well, I'm sure she seems so to a stranger, said Caroline tightly, but to her family... She flashed me another of her cold smiles. You have to understand that my mother is very old, she explained. Her mind isn't what it used to be, her grasp of reality. She broke off with a nervous gesture. I'm sure I don't have to explain it to you, she said. No, you don't, I answered pleasantly. It's none of my business, after all. I saw her eyes narrow as she registered the barb. She may be bigoted, but she isn't stupid. I mean, she floundered for a few moments. For a second, I thought I saw a glint of humor in the boy's eyes, though that might have been my imagination. I mean, my mother doesn't always know what's best for her. She was back in control again, her smile as lacquered as her hair. This shop, for instance. I nodded encouragement. My mother is diabetic, explained Caroline. The doctor has warned her repeatedly to avoid sugar in her diet. She refuses to listen. She won't accept treatment. She glanced at her son with a kind of triumph. Tell me, Madame Brochet, is that normal? Is that a normal way to behave? Her voice was rising again, becoming shrill and petulant. Her son looked vaguely embarrassed and glanced at his watch. Maman, I'll be late. His voice was neutral and polite. To me, excuse me, madame, I have to get to school. Here, have one of my special pralines on the house. I held it out to him in a twist of cellophane. My son doesn't eat chocolate. Caroline's voice was sharp. He's hyperactive, sickly. He knows it's bad for him. I looked at the boy. He looked neither sickly nor hyperactive, merely bored and a little self-conscious. She thinks about you a great deal, I told him. Your grandmother. Maybe you could drop in and say hello one of these days. She's one of my regulars. The bright eyes flickered for a moment from beneath the lank brown hair. Maybe. The voice was unenthusiastic. My son doesn't have time to hang about in sweet shops, said Caroline loftily. My son's a gifted boy. He knows what he owes his parents. There was a kind of threat in what she said, a smug note of certainty. She turned to walk past Luc, who was already in the doorway, his satchel swinging. Luc. My voice was low, persuasive. He turned again with some reluctance. I was reaching for him before I knew it, seeing past the polite blank face and seeing... Did you like Rambo? I spoke without thinking, my head reeling with images. For a moment the boy looked guilty. What? Rambo. She gave you a book of his poems for your birthday, didn't she? Yes. The reply was almost inaudible. His eyes, they are a bright grey-green, lifted towards mine. I saw him give a tiny shake of his head as if in warning. I didn't read them, though, he said in a louder voice. I'm not a fan of poetry. A dog-eared book, carefully hidden at the bottom of a clothes chest. A boy murmuring the lovely words to himself with a peculiar fierceness. Please come, I whispered silently. Please, for Armand's sake. Something in his eyes flickered. I have to go now. Caroline was waiting impatiently at the door. Please, take these. I handed him the tiny packet of pralines. The boy has secrets. I could feel them itching to escape. Deftly, keeping out of his mother's line of vision, he took the packet, smiled. I might almost have imagined the words he mouthed as he went. Tell her I'll be there, he whispered, when Maman goes to the hairdresser's. Then he was gone. I told Armand about their visit when she came later today. She shook her head and rocked with laughter when I recounted my conversation with Caroline. Ensconced in her sagging armchair, a cup of mocha in her delicate claw, she looked more like an apple doll than ever. My poor Caro. Doesn't like to be reminded, does she? She sipped the drink gleefully. Where does she get off, huh? She demanded with some testiness, telling you what I can and can't have. Diabetic, am I? That's what her doctor would like us all to think. She grunted. Well, I'm still alive, aren't I? I'm careful. But that isn't enough for them, no. They have to have control. She shook her head. That poor boy. He stutters, did you notice that? I nodded. That's his mother's doing. Armand was scornful. If she'd left him alone, but no. Always correcting him, always carrying on, making him worse, making out there's something wrong with him all the time. She made a sound of derision. There's nothing wrong with him that a good dose of living wouldn't cure, she declared stoutly. Let him run a while without worrying what would happen if he fell over. Let him loose. Let him breathe. I said that it was normal for a mother to be protective of her children. Armande gave me one of her satirical glances. "Is that what you call it?" she said. "The same way the mistletoe is protective of the apple tree?" She gave a cackle. "I used to have apple trees in my garden," she told me. "Mistletoe got them all, one by one. Nasty little plant, doesn't look like much, pretty berries, no strength of its own, but Lord, invasive." She sipped again at her drink. "And poison to everything it touches." She nodded to me knowingly. "That's my Caro," she said. "That's her." I saw Guillaume again after lunch. He didn't stop except to say hello, saying he was on his way to the newsagent for his papers. Guillaume is addicted to film magazines, although he never goes to the cinema, and every week he receives an entire parcel of them. Video and Cine Club, Telerama and Film Express. His is the only satellite dish in the village, and in his sparse little house there is a widescreen television and a Toshiba video recorder wall-mounted above an entire bookcase of video cassettes. I noticed that he was carrying Charlie again, the dog looking dull-eyed and listless on his master's arm. Every few moments, Guillaume stroked the dog's head with a familiar gesture of tenderness and finality. "How is he?" I asked at last. "Oh, he has his good days," said Guillaume. "There's plenty of life in him yet." And they went on their way, the small, dapper man clutching his sad brown dog as if his life depended on it. Josephine Muscat went by but did not stop. I was a little disappointed that she did not come in, for I'd been hoping to talk to her again, but she simply shot me a wild-eyed look as she passed, hands jammed deeply into her pockets. I noticed her face looked puffy, the eyes slitted closed, though it might have been against the gritty rain, the mouth zipped shut. A thick, no-colour scarf bound her head like a bandage. I called to her, but she did not answer, quickening her step as if at some impending danger. I shrugged and let her go. These things take time, sometimes forever. Still, later, when Anouk was playing in Les Malraudes and I had closed shop for the day, I found myself strolling down the Avenue des Francs-Bourgeois in the direction of the Café de la République. It is a small, dingy place, soaped windows with an unchanging spécialité du jour scrawled across, and a scruffy awning which reduces the available light still further. Inside, a couple of silent slot machines flank the round tables at which the few customers sit, moodily discussing matters of no importance over interminable demi and café crème. There is the bland, oily smell of microwaved food, and a pall of greasy cigarette smoke hangs over the room, even though no one seems to be smoking. I noticed one of Caroline Clermont's hand-lettered yellow cards in a prominent position by the open door. A black crucifix hangs above it. I looked in, hesitated, and entered. Muscat was at the bar. He eyed me as I walked in, his mouth stretching. Almost imperceptibly, I saw his eyes flick to my legs, my breasts, whap whap, lighting up like the dials on a slot machine. He laid a hand on the pump, flexing one heavy forearm. "What can I give you?" "Café cognac, please." The coffee came in a small brown cup with 2 wrapped sugar lumps. I took it to a table by the window. A couple of old men, one with the Légion d'honneur clipped to one frayed lapel, eyed me with suspicion. "Do you want some company?" smirked Muscat from behind the bar. "It's just that you look a little lonely, sitting there on your own." "No, thank you," I told him politely. "In fact, I thought I might see Josephine today. Is she here?" Muscat looked at me sourly, his good humour gone. "Oh yes, your bosom friend." His voice was dry. "Well, you missed her. She just went upstairs to lie down. One of her sick headaches. He began to polish a glass with peculiar ferocity. Spends all afternoon shopping, then has to lie down in the bloody evening while I do the work. Is she all right? He looked at me. Course she is. His voice was sharp. Why shouldn't she be? If her bloody ladyship could just get off her fat ass once in a while, we might even be able to keep this business afloat. He dug his dishcloth-wrapped fist into the glass, grunting with the effort. I mean, he made an expressive gesture. I mean, just look at this place. He glanced at me as if about to say something else. Then his gaze slid past me to the door. Hey. I gathered he was addressing someone just out of my field of vision. Don't you people listen. I'm closed. I heard a man's voice say something indistinct in reply. Muscat gave his wide, cheerless grin. Can't you idiots read? Behind the bar, he indicated the yellow twin of the card I had seen at the door. Get lost, go on. I stood up to see what was happening. There were 5 people standing uncertainly at the cafe entrance, 2 men and 3 women. All 5 were strangers to me, unremarkable but for their air of indefinable otherness. The patched trousers, the work boots, the faded t-shirts which proclaimed them outsiders. I should know that look. I had it once. The man who had spoken had red hair and a green bandana to keep it out of his face. His eyes were cautious, his tone carefully neutral. We're not selling anything, he explained. We just want to get a couple of beers and some coffee. We're not going to be any trouble. Muscat looked at him in contempt. I said we're closed. One of the women, a drab, thin girl with a pierced eyebrow, tugged at the redhead's sleeve. It's no good, Rue. We better... Wait a minute. Rue shook her off impatiently. I don't understand. The lady who was here a moment ago, your wife, she was going to... Screw my wife, exclaimed Muscat shrilly. My wife couldn't find her arse with both hands in a pocket torch. It's my name above the door, and I say we're closed. He had taken 3 steps from behind the bar, and now he stood barring the doorway, hands on his hips like an overweight gunslinger in a spaghetti western. I could see the yellowy gleam of his knuckles at his belt, hear the whistle of his breath. His face was congested with rage. Right. Rue's face was expressionless. He flicked a hostile, deliberate glance at the few customers scattered about the room. Closed. Another glance around the room. For a moment, our eyes met. Closed to us, he said quietly. Not as stupid as you look, are you? Said Muscat with sour glee. We had enough of your lot last time. This time, we're not standing for it. Okay. Rue turned to go. Muscat saw him off, strutting stiff-legged, like a dog scenting a fight. I walked past him without a word, leaving my coffee half-finished on the table. I hope he wasn't expecting a tip. I caught up with the river gypsies halfway down the Avenue de Franc-Bourgeois. It had begun to drizzle again, and the 5 of them looked drab and sullen. I could see their boats now down in Les Maraudes, a dozen of them, 2 dozen, a flotilla of green, yellow, blue, white, red, some flying flags of damp washing, others painted with Arabian Nights and magic carpets and unicorn variations reflected in the dull green water. I'm sorry that happened, I told them. They're not an especially welcoming lot in Lansquenet-sur-Thames. Rue gave me a flat, measuring look. My name is Diane, I told him. I have the Chocolat just opposite the church. La Céleste Praline? He watched me, waiting. I recognized myself in his carefully expressionless face. I wanted to tell him, to tell all of them, that I knew their rage and humiliation, that I'd known it too, that they weren't alone. But I also knew their pride, the useless defiance which remains after everything else has been scoured away. The last thing they wanted, I knew, was sympathy. Why don't you drop in tomorrow? I asked lightly. I don't do beer, but I think you might enjoy my coffee. He looked at me sharply as if he suspected me of mocking him. Please come, I insisted. Have coffee and a slice of cake on the house. All of you. The thin girl looked at her friends and shrugged. Wu returned the gesture. Maybe. The voice was non-committal. We've got a busy schedule, chirped the girl pertly. I smiled. Find a window, I suggested. Again, that measuring, suspicious look. Maybe. I watched them go down into Les Maraudes as Anouk came running up the hill towards me, the tails of her red raincoat flapping like the wings of an exotic bird. Maman, maman, look, the boats! We admired them for a while, the flat barges, the tall houseboats with the corrugated roofs, the stovepipe chimneys, the frescoes, the multicolored flags, slogans, painted devices to ward against accident and shipwreck, the small barks, fishing lines, pots for crayfish hoisted up against the tide mark for the night, tattered umbrellas sheltering decks, the beginnings of campfires and steel drums on the riverside. There was a smell of burning wood and petrol and frying fish, a distant sound of music from across the water as a saxophone began its eerily human, melodious wail. Halfway across the town, I could just make out the figure of a red-headed man standing alone on the deck of a plain black houseboat. As I watched, he lifted his arm. I waved back. It was almost dark when we made our way home. Back in Les Maraudes, a drummer had joined the saxophone, and the sounds of his drumming slapped flatly off the water. I passed the Café de la République without looking in. I had barely reached the top of the hill when I felt a presence at my elbow. I turned and saw Josephine Muscat, coatless now but with a scarf around her head and half covering her face. In the semi-darkness, she looked pallid, nocturnal. Run home, Anouk. Wait for me there. Anouk gave me a curious glance, then turned and ran off obediently up the hill, her coattails flapping wildly. I heard what you did. Josephine's voice was hoarse and soft. You walked out because of that business with the river people. I nodded. Of course. Poor Marie was furious. The stern note in her voice was almost admiration. You should have heard the things he was saying. I laughed. Fortunately, I don't have to listen to anything poor Marie has to say, I told her blandly. Now I'm not supposed to talk to you anymore, she went on. He thinks you're a bad influence. A pause as she looked at me with nervous curiosity. He doesn't want me to have friends, she added. Seems to me I'm hearing rather too much about what poor Marie wants, I said mildly. I'm not really all that interested in him. Now, you, I touched her arm fleetingly, I find you quite interesting. She flushed and looked away, as if expecting to find someone standing at her shoulder. You don't understand, she muttered. I think I do. With my fingertips, I touched the scarf which hid her face. Why do you wear this? I asked abruptly. Do you want to tell me? She looked at me in hope and panic, shook her head. I pulled gently at the scarf. You're pretty, I said as it came loose. You could be beautiful. There was a fresh bruise just beneath her lower lip, bluish in the failing light. She opened her mouth for the automatic lie. I interrupted her. That's not true, I said. How can you know that? Her voice was sharp. I hadn't even said. You didn't have to. Silence. Across the water, a flute scattered bright notes among the drum beats. When she spoke at last, her voice was thick with self-loathing. It's stupid, isn't it? Her eyes were tiny crescents. I never blame him, not really. Sometimes I even forget what really happened. She took a deep breath, like a diver going under. Walking into doors, falling downstairs, stepping on rakes. She sounded close to laughter. I could hear hysteria bubbling beneath the surface of her words. Accident prone, that's what he says I am. Accident prone. Why was it this time? I asked gently. Was it because of the river people? She nodded. They didn't mean any harm. I was going to serve them. Her voice rose shrilly for a second. I don't see why I should have to do what that bitch Clermont wants all the time. Oh, we must stand together, she mimicked savagely, for the sake of the community, for our children, Madame Muscat, breaking back into her own voice with a stricken intake of breath, when in normal circumstances she wouldn't say hello to me in the street, wouldn't give me steam off her shit. She took another deep breath, controlling the outburst with an effort. It's always Caro this, Caro that. I've seen the way he looks at her in church. Why can't you be like Caro Clermont? Now she was her husband, his voice thick with beery range. She even managed his mannerisms, the thrust-out chin, the strutting, aggressive posture. She makes you look like a clumsy sow. She's got style, class. She's got a fine son doing well at school. And what have you got, huh? Josephine. She turned towards me with a stricken expression. I'm sorry. For a moment, I almost forgot where. I know. I could feel rage pricking at my thumbs. You must think I'm stupid to have stayed with him all these years. Her voice was dull, her eyes dark and resentful. No, I don't. She ignored my reply. Well, I am, she declared, stupid and weak. I don't love him. Can't remember a time when I ever loved him, but when I think of actually leaving him, she broke off in confusion. Actually, leaving him, she repeated in a low, wondering voice. No, it's no use. She looked up at me again and her voice was closed, final. That's why I can't talk to you again, she told me in calm desperation. I couldn't leave you guessing. You deserve better than that. But this is how it has to be. No, I told her, it doesn't. But it does. She defends herself bitterly, desperately against the possibility of comfort. Can't you see? I'm no good. I steal. I lied to you before. I steal things. I do it all the time. Gently. Yes, I know. The clear realization turns between us like a Christmas bauble. Things can be better, I told her at last. Paul Marie doesn't rule the world. He might as well, retorted Josephine mulishly. I smiled. If that stubbornness of hers could be turned out instead of in, what could she not achieve? I could do it, too. I could feel her thoughts so close, welcoming me in. It would be so easy to take control. I turned the thought aside impatiently. I had no right to force her to any decision. Before, you had no one to go to, I said. Now you do. Do I? In her mouth, it was almost an admission of defeat. I did not reply. Let her answer that for herself. She looked at me in silence for a while. Her eyes were full of river lights from Les Maraudes. Again, it struck me with what small a twist she might become beautiful. Good night, Josephine. I did not turn to look at her, but I know she watched me as I made my way up the hill. And I know she stood watching long after I had rounded the corner and disappeared from sight. The end. That was intense.
Oh, it was.
Very intense.
Yeah.
How we all doing?
Got one who's asleep over here.
Are there any nice men in this book? Or are they all evil?
The one with the dog is nice.
Yeah.
The one with the dog
is
is nice.
Okay.
I think Luke is nice. Wowzers! God, that was what a wild ride. Couple of chapters. What a lot of voices. I think I got all of the voices a bit mixed up.
No, I was really impressed.
It was great.
Yeah.
Was it all right? Okay.
Yeah.
I got to the bit with Rue and I was like, oh shit, I don't have a voice for Rue. I've already used one of my man voices for Muscat and the other one for the priest. fuck. I think because those were quite long ones, weren't they? They were longer than the usual ones.
Later than normal.
Yeah. What time are we on?
10 o'clock.
Yeah. So it looks like maybe just 2 chapters for tonight, and we can see if maybe the next one is less intense next time.
It was quite sexy between those two women, wasn't it?
What's that? Who was that? I can't hear very well.
Charlotte.
What kind of me? Oh, a Charlotte kind of me. Let me find you. Right, I'm looking at you. Speak.
That was quite sexy between those two ladies. Wasn't it?
I thought so. Oh, I'm glad it's not just me. I was like, I ship this. I ship this hard. I wonder if it's written sexy. There's got to be fan fiction out there, right? Like sexy baby fan fiction for these two. Kitty, write some for us.
The story first.
Kitty is literally banging away on the laptop as we speak.
If you write fan fiction.
Oh, what do we got?
Right, let me just. There's.
Are they tagged?
They're all 52 fanfictions and fanfiction.net of Chocolat. Let's try archive of our own.
I was going to say, what does AO3 have to say about it?
I'm going to stop recording, but now I'm going to leave it going.
Yeah, this needs to be recorded for posterity.
If you do write fan fiction, I can make sure it gets to Joanne, who happens to be a friend of my family.
just drop that in there. Casual.
It's Josephine and Vian, yeah?
Yeah.
I found one really easy.
What's it called?
It's called A Taste of This.
Yeah, it is.
I need to get my charger.
So at some point we're gonna do like a halfway break of this, and we'll do like maybe a one-off standalone story time that's reading some like Vian and Josephine fanfic.
I found some crossover Chocolat and Doctor Who fanfic because
Okay, I'm not kidding. Send me that link.
Is it just like actual copy paste of a chapter and then also Doctor Who was there?
It's a Doctor Who fanfic inspired by Chocolat. I don't know what that means exactly. I will send you it though.
Thank you.
He's an alien.